And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. Revelation 12, 3-4.
What I want to know is how John knew what a dragon looked like. Does my mental picture of dragons, based on medieval art and Saturday matinees, match even remotely what he saw? I don't suppose it matters. At any rate, this is definitely Satan. If there were any doubts, they are dispelled in both Revelation 12:9 and 20, verse 2, where the dragon, the serpent of Garden of Eden fame, the devil, meaning slanderer, and Satan are all identified as the same creature. It also proves that Herod was acting under the devil's explicit instructions when he ordered the children in Bethlehem slaughtered in an attempt to destroy the coming king. It is no coincidence that the dragon is described having 7 crowned heads and 10 horns. This is precisely how the political empire of the Antichrist, aka the beast, is described. Does this mean that they're the same thing? No, but it does establish that the Antichrist is operating in the spirit and power of Satan. We have already seen, actually it's a few chapters later in Revelation, how the 7 heads are associated with Roman emperors, a metaphor for godless earthly authority. Of course, with biblical prophecy, these symbols often take on several layers of meaning. One thing is certain, the Antichrist and the dragon are joined at the spiritual hip. John continues the overview.
Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Revelation 12:6.
In a twisted sort of way, it's gratifying to learn that Israel has finally learned to take instructions. Their Messiah, during his Olivet Discourse, had told them, that is, those living near Jerusalem in Judea, that the time would come marked by a specific sign when they would have to run for their lives. In Revelation, we are assured that Israel, the woman, as a nation, does precisely that. Those who flee will be sheltered for 3.5 years. The they that feed her in the wilderness I take to be those stars of heaven who were not swept away by the dragon's tail. In other words, angels who remained loyal to Yahweh. Supplying the needs of the woman, Israel, is in perfect accord with Yahweh's consistent and long-standing promises to her. Here's how Mark recorded Yahshua's admonition.
So when you see the abomination of desolation,
something we'll cover shortly,
spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter. For in those days there will be tribulation, such as has not been seen since the beginning of creation, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. Mark 13:14-19.
The parallel passage in Matthew calls this period of time the Great Tribulation, and Jeremiah calls it the time of Jacob's trouble. We'll talk about this episode in detail in a coming chapter. For now, just note that the shift in the political wind that causes the Jews to flee is extremely sudden. There is no time to plan. There's not even enough time to pack. But not all of the actions here on earth. Although we can't be dogmatic about the timing, it appears to me that the following scene culminates near the midpoint of the tribulation, for it signals a drastic change in Satan's modus operandi.
And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Revelation 12:7-9.
Angels and demons, though spirits, are finite creatures. They can't be in more than one place at a time. The reason Lucifer is called the devil, that is, the slanderer, is that he spends his time in heaven accusing us of being sinful, unworthy people. He's right, of course, but if we're willing to accept God's gift of salvation, our penalty has already been paid, so his case gets thrown out of court. At some point, however, Satan and his angels are evicted. They will no longer have access to the throne of Yahweh. Contempt of court, I suppose. This is good news and bad news. He won't be accusing Christians anymore, as if God couldn't see our shortcomings on his own if he had chosen to look. But from that point forward, Satan and his minions will be spending all of their time on earth, walking about like roaring lions, looking for tasty spiritual morsels to devour. John's narrative continues.
Then I heard a loud voice in heaven, "Now salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Messiah have come, for the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time." Revelation 12:10-12.
After almost 6,000 years of satanic trickery and deceit, focused on separating us from the God who made us, it's come down to this: a final 3.5 years of open warfare against mankind upon the earth. Not against God, you understand. Satan's already lost that battle. His wrath is against the sole object of his jealous hatred, man. Here's the way Satan sees the game. If he can get you to your grave without knowing Yahweh, he's won. Of course, he'd prefer it if you'd actually side with him, to accept his spirit and be born from below, as Yahweh's people are born from above. Those who are indwelled with Satan's spirit are his most effective tools in obfuscating the message of Yahweh's redeeming love. But as much as Satan craves our worship and submission, he's willing to settle for our souls. Until this point, he's been content to leave people alone who were disinterested in or antagonistic toward the Word of God, those people who would likely die in their sins anyway, so why expend the effort? But now it's a whole new ball game. He can no longer afford to sit around and wait for the lost to die of natural causes. Satan is now like the forlorn cartoon vulture sitting on a tree limb who turns to his buddy and says, "Heck with patience, I'm going to go out and kill something." A major paradigm shift is indicated here. Satan is no longer seen merely fostering ungodly behavior in the earth. He's now harvesting all the lost souls he can, while he's still got the chance. He knows his days are growing short. Nor is he prohibited from killing God's children anymore, something he now begins to do with reckless abandon, as much out of spite as to prevent the cancer of eternal life from spreading. I get the feeling that among the saved at this point in history, hanging on to one's mortal life is no longer a top priority. Every soul who dies trusting Yahshua is further evidence that Satan has been overcome by the blood of the Lamb. When the heavenly voice said,
"Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea,"
I think we can safely assume that he's speaking of Jews and Gentiles.
Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time.
That is 3.5 years.
From the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who kept the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Yeshua the Messiah. Revelation 12:13 through 17.
The first group on Satan's hit list is Israel, although this is nothing new for Satan. It's a 180-degree turnaround for the one he has empowered as his emissary, the Antichrist, at least as far as his public persona is concerned. As we shall see in a future chapter, the trigger for this newfound rage is Israel's national rejection of his messianic claims, and worse, for him, their belated acceptance of their true Messiah, Yahshua. Time after time in the book of Judges, we read of Yahweh's willingness to rescue Israel when they cried out for help. Here, for the first time in a long time, Israel is crying out to Yahweh again, "Save us!" The phrase, "two wings of a great eagle," seems to modern ears to be a reference to the use of aircraft as the Jews make their escape. It may mean nothing more than this, but I have my doubts. I'm having trouble picturing 6 or 8 million Israelis lined up at David Ben-Gurion Airport trying to catch El Al flights to the middle of nowhere. The whole point of fleeing to the wilderness is that it's hard to get to. Now, I think something else is happening here. Could it be that the great eagle represents America? I know. All of the governments of earth, America included, will have fallen under the suzerainty of the Antichrist by this time. But factor in that we've had 3.5 years of angelic preaching and witnessing by the 144,000, and I think there could well be enough latent mutiny in the U.S. military to engineer a massive, spontaneous, and unauthorized rescue effort on behalf of the Jews. There's no reason to suppose that the huge American contingent of the UN peacekeeping forces stationed in Israel will have been sent home at this time. They will be on the scene, equipped for battle, and will still remember their original directive, protect Israel. One thing's for sure, such an operation would definitely separate the sheep from the goats. A few chapters back, I reiterated the popular theory that Isaiah 18 refers to America. Listen again to the payoff verse.
In that time a present will be brought to Yahweh of hosts, a people
whose description leads us to the conclusion that they are Americans,
to the place of the name of Yahweh of hosts, to Mount Zion. Isaiah 18:7.
If Americans are to be responsible for bringing the Jews back to Jerusalem from wherever they've fled, it isn't inconceivable that Americans will also be responsible for hiding and protecting them in the first place. I don't know for sure, of course. The evidence is cryptic, to say the least. Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part. I'd love to see my countrymen form the backbone of the Fellowship of Repentant Laodicea. At any rate, this scenario sure beats our present course, leading the lynch mob demanding that Israel commit geographical suicide by surrendering her buffer territories to her mortal enemies. And what about the flood sent by the serpent to destroy the Jews? Is it literal? Is it water? I doubt it. The last 3.5 years of the tribulation, as we shall see, will be a time of worldwide drought. Since Satan has in times past been given the ability to manipulate storms, see Job 1:19 or Mark 4:37 for that, this drought is, like the 10 plagues of Egypt, a sign from God that Satan's teeth have been pulled. So though we don't know precisely when this flood will occur, it seems highly unlikely that Satan will be able to conjure up a deluge of water, especially one extensive enough to threaten millions of people. But a flood of Gentile troops that get swallowed by the desert? Yeah, that makes sense in a divine wrath sort of way. It would also explain why, after
the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up a flood,
the Antichrist didn't merely pursue the Jews using conventional military means. He's already sent everything he had after them with disastrous results. Is there a Pharaoh in the house? It's those blankety-blank Christians, the world leader will seethe. This is all their fault.